She walked into the wrong hotel room and found the man who would change everything. Elena Moore, a fierce and talented designer, burdened by her mother's illness and a haunted past, never expected to cross paths again with Dominic Vance, the ruthless CEO she once swore to avoid. But one night, one mistake, and one look began a slow-burning story of redemption, forgiveness, and love that refused to quit. How far would you go to protect your pride or surrender to your heart? Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable love stories. The Imperial Crown Hotel shimmered beneath Manhattan's golden evening light, its glass facade reflecting a skyline dripping with opulence. Inside, a soft jazz trio played beneath cascading crystal chandeliers, their mellow harmonies mixing with the clink of champagne flutes and murmurs of designers, investors, and media elite. In the middle of it all stood Elena Moore, radiant in a silver satin gown that hugged her slender frame, her dark curls flowing freely down her back. Every eye found her, drawn not just by her beauty, but by the aura of someone who had just won. Tonight, Elena was being honored as the creative mind behind one of the year's most talked-about campaigns, a bold, socially conscious brand launch that disrupted expectations. As she accepted the award earlier, her smile was dazzling, her voice calm and sharp. But now, as she stood near the gallery-like display of her campaign visuals, laughter buzzing around her, Elena's fingers clutched the small clutch purse at her side where her phone buzzed yet again. She didn't look. She already knew what it was. More messages from the hospital, more updates about unpaid dialysis sessions for her mother, more numbers that made her heart sink. She took another sip of her champagne, feeling its chill slide down her throat as she exhaled slowly. Not tonight. Just for this one night, she told herself. She was allowed to feel free, to float above the stress and pressure she carried daily. Elena, darling, you've truly outdone yourself, one fashion executive purred, leaning in with a kiss to both cheeks. Another clapped her on the back, pushing a business card into her palm. Let's talk collaborations, he said with a wink. She smiled, gracious and composed, offering rehearsed thanks, all while a storm brewed behind her emerald eyes. But when her gaze slipped to the far end of the room and caught a glimpse of a tall figure in a black tailored suit, her body tensed. Just for a flash, she thought it was him, Dominic Vance, the man who once coldly took over the small publishing house her father had built from the ground up, the man behind the ruthless empire she swore to never work with. Her jaw tightened. She turned away quickly, pushing down the memory of the day she declined Vance Media's contract 6 months ago. I don't work for men who crush dreams for profit, she had told his assistant. Bold words, costly ones. Now, with her mother's medical bills threatening to drown her, her savings nearly vanished from keeping her independent studio alive, and clients taking months to pay invoices, Elena couldn't help but wonder if she'd been too proud. She tilted her glass again, swallowing hard. Pride doesn't keep the lights on. As the night stretched, the crowd began to thin, replaced by slower jazz, dimmed lights, and the thick, drowsy air of too many toasts. Elena's feet ached in her silver heels, and her head spun just enough to make the lobby blur at the edges. She approached the front desk, her voice soft but firm. Elena Moore, my room, please. The young desk clerk, clearly near the end of a long shift, handed her a key card without checking the number carefully. She didn't notice either, just took it with a faint nod and glided toward the elevator. Room 1406. She thought she had said 1404. The elevator ride was quiet, her mind buzzing with images of her mother in the sterile hospital room, her fingers trembling each time she reviewed the growing mountain of debt. As the elevator dinged, Elena stepped out, her gown sweeping across the plush carpet, her body begging for sleep. She found the door, swiped the card, and it clicked open. Dim hallway light spilled into the suite, revealing lavish furnishings and a soft, woody scent, sandalwood and something deeper. She kicked off her heels, the sound echoing in the silence, then slipped out of her gown, letting it slide down her arms and pool at her feet. Without turning on the light, she collapsed onto the massive bed, the silk sheets cool against her skin. Her breath slowed and her mind finally emptied. She didn't notice the leather travel bag by the closet. She didn't see the folded suit jacket on the chair. She didn't realize that this wasn't room 1404. And she certainly didn't know that the suite belonged to the one man she had sworn never to face again. Dominic Vance. Dominic Vance stepped into the lobby of the Imperial Crown just after midnight. His black coat slung over one arm, his crisp white shirt slightly unbuttoned at the collar. Fresh off a transatlantic flight from London, he looked every bit the billionaire media mogul, composed, cool, and carved from quiet control. The staff bowed slightly as he passed, offering his room key without hesitation. Room 1406, his suite, his fortress of silence. He longed for nothing more than a hot shower and 6 hours of uninterrupted sleep. But when he opened the door, the faint scent of jasmine drifted to greet him, and something felt off. A soft sound came from the bedroom, the rustle of sheets. A figure lay curled on his bed, the moonlight from the window casting her in silver. A pale shoulder peeked from beneath the covers, brown curls fanned over the pillow, and a glint of silver satin glowed faintly on the floor near the bed. Dominic stepped forward, eyes narrowing. He was used to competitors playing dirty, sending accidents, publicity traps, or scandals to bait him. But this, a woman asleep in his bed? He reached for the phone to call the desk, but then he saw her face, Elena Moore. The same woman who'd once stared him down across a glossy boardroom table, refusing his offer with fire in her eyes and a tone that could cut steel. "You don't get to buy everything," she had said, "especially not me." Now here she was, asleep, defenseless. Her lips parted in sleep, her breath steady, her face softened without the armor of anger. The sight struck something deep within him, something he wasn't prepared for. He let go of the phone. Quietly, he stepped back and settled into the armchair near the window, loosening his tie and watching her in silence. He didn't understand why, but the thought of waking her and sending her away felt wrong. By the time sunlight bled through the silk curtains, Dominic was still sitting there, a steaming cup of espresso in hand. Elena stirred, then blinked groggily, the realization slowly painting her face with panic. She sat up abruptly, the covers clutched to her chest, her hair wild, her voice cracked and confused. "Where am I? What?" Her eyes locked onto him. "You?" He didn't flinch. "Morning," he said simply, taking another sip. "Sleep well?" "Sleep well? You knew this wasn't my room. Why didn't you wake me?" She snapped, scrambling to gather her clothes, cheeks flushed. "I thought about it," he replied evenly. "But you looked like you needed the rest." Her jaw dropped. "This is insane. This is the hotel's fault. I didn't break in. This is a mistake." "Of course," Dominic said smoothly, standing now, all 6'2" of composed power. He took a slow step forward, not enough to threaten, but enough to make her nerves buzz. "Though I must say, it's the most effective icebreaker I've seen in years." She gaped. "You think this is funny?" "I think it's serendipitous," he replied, his gray eyes cool and unreadable. Flustered, Elena shoved her feet into her heels, snatched up her dress, and stumbled toward the door. "Don't think this means anything. I still don't want to work for you." "Funny," Dominic said, leaning casually against the doorway as she fumbled with the lock. "Because I've been trying to figure out how to get you back in the room, with a contract, of course." She froze, then turned slowly, fire returning to her voice. "I am not for sale, Dominic Vance." "Good," he said, his voice lower now, almost amused. "Because what I want can't be bought." With that, she yanked open the door and disappeared down the hallway, her heels clicking like gunshots. Dominic stood in the silence she left behind, and for the first time in months, something flickered behind his steel composure. Interest, amusement, maybe even intrigue. The next morning, Elena sat in her tiny studio apartment in Brooklyn, wearing an oversized sweater, a mug of bitter coffee warming her hands. She opened her laptop to a new email, her eyes narrowing at the subject line. Proposal, Vance Media Partnership. It was from Dominic's assistant. The offer was triple Hear's standard rate. Full creative control. No NDA traps. Just work. Just the kind of project she dreamed of when she was young and still believed ambition could save the world. She stared at the screen, her fingers hovering. Her mother's last medical statement sat on the counter behind her. She took a deep breath and typed 10 a.m. Monday. I'll hear him out. Just business. But deep down, she already knew nothing about. This was going to be just business. Paris glittered beneath the rain, a city soaked in light and tension. Elena stood stiffly in the corner of the hotel lobby, her navy work dress clinging to her from the damp, her jaw clenched, eyes blazing. The front desk clerk had just handed her a key, room 1104, right next to room 1103. Dominic Vance's room. Again, she stared at the slip of paper in disbelief. "Are you toying with me?" she hissed when he stepped off the elevator, his white shirt sleeves casually rolled, his tie loosened like he owned the damn planet. He tilted his head, unbothered. "You got the wrong room last time," he said, his voice low and maddeningly calm. "But I didn't pick the wrong person." His words struck her harder than she wanted to admit. Heart hammering, Elena said nothing. She pushed past him toward the elevator, praying the confined space wouldn't betray her thoughts. But of course, he followed. Of course, he stood too close. And of course, the scent of his cologne, woodsy, dark, clean, wrapped around her like a second skin. She stepped back. Her spine hit the glass wall. Dominic leaned slightly closer, his voice dropping just enough to make her breath catch. "Careful, more," he murmured, his tone like velvet draped over iron. "I won't be patient forever." When the doors opened, she bolted. That night, Elena sat in her hotel room staring at her laptop, her fingers motionless above the keyboard. She'd come here for a presentation, to pitch the global branding strategy Vance Media would be rolling out across Europe. She had convinced herself she could handle working with him. But after one too many glances in meetings, one too many brushes of fingers passing papers, it was becoming harder to pretend his presence didn't rattle her. He wasn't who she expected. He didn't interrupt her in meetings. He didn't dismiss her designs. He listened, actually listened, and even praised her in front of the Paris team, making her idea the focal point of the campaign. "Moore has vision," he said to a boardroom of executives. "That's why she's here." Elena had been stunned. For a second, she forgot she hated him. She reminded herself of what Miles had said back in New York. Her ex's voice haunted her still. "Dominic Vance is the reason your father lost everything. He didn't just acquire the company, he crushed it." At the time, she'd brushed it off. Miles had always been dramatic, bitter. But that seed had taken root, and tonight, in the City of Light, doubt began to bloom. A knock on her door startled her. She crossed the room, cracked it open, and there he was, Dominic, holding a folder of notes. "Quick review before tomorrow," he said, as if this was just business. She hesitated, then opened the door wider. The air shifted the moment he stepped inside. He walked past her without asking, placing the folder on the desk. "You've worked harder than I expected," he said, his voice oddly gentle. "But don't let me find you passed out in my bed again." She whirled on him, her face flushed. "Are you ever going to let that go?" He looked at her with a faint smile, but his eyes were serious. "Probably not." Elena shook her head, forcing a laugh, but her chest tightened. "You act like this is some game." Dominic stepped closer, and this time she didn't move. "It's not a game," he said quietly, "but I like playing with someone who doesn't always let me win." That night, after he left, Elena sat on the bed gripping her phone, her heart a storm. She told herself she needed to focus, she needed to draw lines. But the next morning, she found a coffee on her desk. No note, no name. But she knew it was him. Back in New York a few days later, she kept her head down, tried to drown herself in deadlines and deliverables. But he was always near, offering opinions, asking for late-night revisions. One evening, during an empty office review, he moved beside her at the drafting table, so close his breath stirred her hair. "You're hiding something," he said softly, staring at her unfinished concept sketches. "You always pull back right before you show me what you really see." She didn't respond. Couldn't. She grabbed her sketch pad and fled to her apartment, her pulse thudding like it was trying to tell her the truth. She wasn't just afraid of him. She was afraid of what he made her feel. How he disarmed her without even trying. And the worst part? She didn't want to run. Not really. The letter arrived on a gray Tuesday afternoon, tucked between client invoices and a bill from the electric company. Elena nearly tossed it aside until she noticed the envelope. Thick, expensive paper, her name written in bold, slanted ink that wasn't typed but handwritten. Her heart skipped. She tore it open with trembling fingers and found a single page folded inside, the handwriting unmistakably his. "Elena, I was wrong. I let my pride lead when I should have listened. I hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me. Not now, Maybe not ever. But I want you to know I didn't know about your father, your family, the way my decisions rippled into your life. Had I known, I would have done things differently. I can't rewrite the past, but I'm here. Not as the CEO you hate, but as the man who hasn't stopped thinking about you since the night you fell asleep in my room. I see you now, truly see you. I don't want a contract. I want a chance. Her eyes blurred as she reached the end. Another envelope slipped out, a logo sketched in clean, elegant lines. E and D, their initials entwined like a quiet promise. Beneath it was a small note. For a new beginning, if you'll have it. Elena clutched the paper, her chest tight with emotion. She should have been angry, should have torn it all up. But instead she set it gently on her desk and sat there for a long time, her fingers brushing the edge of the logo. That week, she focused on freelance work, accepting smaller projects just enough to scrape by. She avoided Thorn Global, ignored calls, replied to emails with curt lines. When Dominic texted, "I'll wait," she deleted the message, but her fingers lingered over the screen before she did. Every time she tried to move on, his words echoed in her mind. Not just the ones he wrote, but the ones he said when she wasn't expecting it. The soft things. The honest ones. To clear her mind, she spent more time at the Hope Arts Orphanage, helping kids paint dream houses and stories in colors they didn't know how to speak aloud. One afternoon, she arrived early, her arms filled with donated brushes and paper. As she stepped into the yard, laughter rang out. She paused, blinking against the sunlight. Dominic was there. Sleeves rolled, shirt untucked, sneakers on instead of designer shoes. He was crouched beside a little boy, helping him aim a basketball. His laugh was unguarded, his eyes bright with something she didn't recognize, joy. Not the polished, boardroom charm she knew, but something raw and real. "Uncle Dominic, I scored," the boy shouted as the ball swished through the hoop. Dominic stood, turned, and froze when he saw her. He didn't approach, didn't flash his usual confident smirk. He simply nodded, a quiet smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You okay?" he asked when the kids darted inside for juice boxes. She nodded once, barely. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice low. He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "I meant what I wrote. I'll wait, however long it takes." He walked away without asking anything more, leaving her in the yard, her heart a battlefield of caution and longing. That night, she opened the drawer in her studio and pulled out the logo again. She stared at it, then at the unfinished painting on her easel. Chaotic strokes, deep shadows. Without thinking, she dipped her brush into a soft gold and added a line of light through the middle, just enough to shift the entire tone. The next morning, she returned to the office, not for a meeting with Dominic, but to turn in her final project files. She declined all in-person reviews. When his assistant asked to schedule a feedback session, she replied with 2 words, "Email only." Still, Dominic kept finding small ways to stay near. A bouquet of irises arrived at her studio with no card. New art supplies showed up at the orphanage. The hospital called her mother to confirm a payment, anonymous. Elena didn't have to guess. He wasn't buying her. He wasn't pushing her. He was simply showing up. And that terrified her more than anything. One night, after finishing a watercolor with one of the kids, a little girl handed her a crooked drawing. "It's you and the man with the funny shoes," she said shyly, pointing to the stick figures. "You look happy." Elena stared at the paper, then at the child's wide grin. She smiled back, but her heart was a mess. Because even when she ran, some part of her always looked over her shoulder, hoping he might still be there. The art auction was Elena's last hope. Hosted at the Brooklyn Gallery beneath soft track lighting and surrounded by minimalist walls, it was her final attempt to raise enough money to cover the last stage of her mother's treatment. She had painted 3 pieces, each born from the storm of her past year. Abstract works full of color, shadows, and quiet pain. It was the first time in 5 years she'd shown personal art publicly. Her stomach twisted as guests arrived, murmuring over champagne and programs. Dressed in a sleek black dress and a soft crimson scarf her mother had given her years ago, Elena stood near the back of the room, praying no one would notice how tightly she was clutching her glass. She hadn't seen or spoken to Dominic in weeks, not since the day at the orphanage, not since his quiet vow that he would wait. She'd kept her distance, folded herself into work, and tried to rebuild the walls that once protected her. But they no longer held the same strength. They felt thin now, cracked in places, vulnerable. As the auction began, she drifted to the shadows of the hallway, not wanting to watch. The first painting, a swirl of navy, gold, and emerald, titled The Weight of Waiting, was brought to the stage. The bidding started modestly, $5,000. Then a voice from the back rose, calm, unmistakably firm. 50,000. The room hushed. Elena's heart stopped. She stepped forward, her eyes scanning the crowd, but the bidder remained just out of sight. The auctioneer blinked, recovered, and continued. No one else challenged the bid. Sold. A second painting went up, After the Rain. Again the same voice. 60,000. A third. The Room We Found. This time it climbed higher. 100,000. All three paintings. All won by the same anonymous bidder. And Elena already knew. She slipped away from the crowd, her breath caught in her throat, heels clicking down the quiet gallery corridor. Outside the main hall, standing near a long stretch of glass overlooking the city, was Dominic. He turned before she could speak, as if he'd felt her coming. "You did it," he said quietly. She stared at him, her voice catching. "It was you." "I didn't buy your paintings," he replied. "I bought your dreams because someone should." Tears welled in her eyes, unwanted but honest. "Why do you keep doing this?" she whispered. "Why do you keep showing up?" He took a step closer, his tone unshakably steady. "Because I can't let you keep running from what you deserve, from who you are, and maybe, from me." She shook her head. "You don't understand." "I do," he said. "More than you know." They stood there, the city glowing beneath them, the noise of the auction muffled by thick gallery walls. For a moment, everything slowed. Elena looked at him, not as the man who'd once symbolized everything she resented, but as someone who had quietly become her anchor. Her storm, her calm. She reached into her purse and pulled out the folded logo, E&D, creases soft from weeks of holding it. She stared at it for a beat, then at him. "What happens if I say I'm not afraid anymore?" "Then I'll say, 'Welcome home,'" he murmured. He offered his hand. She didn't take it right away. Instead, she reached for him, pulled him into a hug, pressing her face against his shoulder, letting the weight of everything crash into him. And he stood there, holding her like she was the only thing that had ever made him feel unshakable. Weeks later, the city sparkled with winter lights as Elena stood beside Dominic in the center of their new shared space. The E&D Foundation for Youth Arts, launched in partnership with the Hope Orphanage. Children's paintings adorned the walls, laughter echoed in the background. Her mother, now healthier and glowing with strength, smiled from a corner of the room. "Remember the night you said you didn't pick the wrong person?" Elena asked, brushing her fingers against his. He smiled, squeezing gently. "I never did." They stood in a quiet corner, watching the next generation paint with wild strokes and wide eyes, the future unfolding in messy colors. "You walked into the wrong room," he whispered, "and brought all the right things with you." Elena smiled, tears glimmering but no longer afraid. "And you waited," she said softly, "until I could walk back through the right door." He kissed her forehead as the room buzzed around them, not with tension, but with life, possibility, and the kind of love that doesn't fade, it just waits. Sometimes, the wrong door leads us to the right destination. Elena and Dominic's story teaches us that love, at its core, is not about perfection or control. It's about vulnerability, growth, and the courage to show up for someone, even when it's inconvenient. We often guard our hearts because of pain from the past, fearing history will repeat itself. But healing doesn't happen in isolation. It happens when someone sees your scars and chooses to stay. Elena thought strength meant standing alone. Dominic believed power meant never needing anyone. But they discovered that true strength comes from connection. And real love comes not from grand gestures, but from consistency, patience, and quiet sacrifice. This story is a reminder that we all carry wounds we don't speak of. That sometimes, the people we least expect, those who challenge us, frustrate us, or even scare us, are the ones who help us find the best parts of ourselves. And most importantly, we're reminded that forgiveness is not weakness, it's bravery. It's choosing hope over fear, light over resentment, and love over pride. Now we'd love to hear from you. Where are you tuning in from? Drop your country or city in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful, heartfelt stories every week. Let's keep spreading warmth, hope, and love, one story at a time.